if you can't find a seat, you can stand. There's a couple of chairs that are still empty. Thank you for coming to this gathering. I didn't know how many people would show up because I'm not very adept at emailing people that I don't have email for. Two announcements. There's no smoking on campus, not even outside, and the restrooms are through the door that way if you need them. I'm going to start out by telling the story of how Steve and I met. Some of you know it and some of you don't. It would have been 58 years today that we met. Whoops, I'm too close to the... I bet that solved the problem. Okay. I was from California. He was from upstate New York, and we met in Nebraska. I was sitting studying my French in the student union, and this really good-looking guy came by, and he said, "Do you mind if I do something radical in this conservative state of Nebraska and sit down by a complete stranger?" And I said, "I'm not from Nebraska, go right ahead." We were best friends ever since then. So this is a day that we always remembered. We celebrated our meeting anniversary more than our wedding anniversary. Some of you were in Montana this summer when we did a similar type gathering for Steve in the woods that he loved so much, and that was on his birthday when he would have been 77. So thank you again for coming. And we have lots of people and hopefully lots of stories. I'm going to hand this to my daughter and she'll say a few words.
Can you hear me? It's really hard to speak. Dad was an anchor. Lost one of my major tethers. And when you lose someone so significant, there just aren't enough words, or not the right words, or I can't find the words, or I don't know what. It's just impossible to figure out, what am I supposed to do? What do I do with his art? And where was he headed? And why didn't I talk to him more? And I'm just very grateful to everyone who is here today, because this honors what he was about. He was about people, as you all know, and coming together and being with art. So, thank you. I think a lot of people would have liked to have been here also, but weren't able to. Some of them had stories to share. As we all know, Dad was a consummate storyteller. So that's why I think you decided that it would be the best way to honor his memory by telling stories today. So we have some, Mom and I will share with you, that are from people who couldn't be with us today.
I need the thing.
You need the thing. Can you hear her?
My voice doesn't go very far, usually. It's going to be hard to hear in the back. Can you hear it in the back?
They can hear you in the back.
The first I'm going to read is from my brother, and I'll just preface it to say that he and my husband were not necessarily close, but he sent this little kind of history of near the beginning. We were all hanging out in San Francisco during the 60s. Yes, it was a hippie era for sure.
Steve and my sister Kath seemed pretty much a twosome. What now seems like a short time, they announced they wanted to be married. So following an age-old tradition, a bachelor party was arranged. Steve had to wait while his brother came from Kansas. Well, the three of us started out at Steve's little apartment, and of course there was a wee bit of drinking. The three of us got along great, but at some point the drinks took their toll on us. That one fun night was part of the reason Steve eventually put drinking in the past. He focused on his photography and his love of Montana. All of our family sends our heartfelt prayers and may Steve rest in peace. And I have to say that this was 2 nights before our wedding, and the day before our wedding, I went to the apartment to get something, and there was Steve, almost green, laying in bed with a humongous hangover. I don't think I ever forgave my brother for that.
This was sent by Malcolm Campbell, who was one of Dad's classmates at Ithaca High School, class of 1964.
Right here. Just my mention high school.
I don't remember exactly when I met Steve, but I got to know him in the 10th grade at Ithaca High School. He made friends easily, was incredibly resourceful, and was interested in all sorts of things, full of intellectual curiosity. Also, anyone who was tuned in at the time could have sensed that what became the 1960s youth revolt was already in the air. We all looked pretty square with our brush cuts and nerdy eyeglasses, but you always knew who the subversives were, and he was one of us. You just knew, and he was part of the spirit of the times. Plus, he was cool, way cool. We used to have an expression, cool as a moose, but sometimes when Steve was around, the moose got upstaged. He and I used to talk about the big questions, and even had some deep thoughts from time to time. We also had a lot of rowdy fun. We often talked about photography, which we both did for a living in different ways. And though I knew quite a lot, he was summa cum laude with a bunch of laureates. There was hardly any aspect that he didn't understand thoroughly, and I often consulted him even on the most obscure things. His work, his photos were magnificent. And worthy of the best museums. I also know from independent sources that he was a brilliant teacher and well loved by his students, known for his thoughtfulness and generosity of spirit. His devotion to sovereign nation culture and well-being meant a lot to me and to my family because of our own background and that of my wife, Colette, as well as the many friendships that we enjoyed there. Knowing Steve was a great experience that we will not forget.
An aside, Malcolm is a writer. The next one comes from his cousin who lives in New Mexico. He's older and has had some health issues and would come, but he couldn't because of that. But he wanted to have a few words. My cousin Steve, two peas in the wrong pod. Our dads were brothers and their interests and professions varied. Steve's dad, Robert, was a family doctor in rural Wisconsin. He delivered babies in the countryside and saw patients 24 hours a day. After several years in Colby, Wisconsin, where Steve was born, Robert moved to Champaign with his wife Betty and sons Steve and Dick. My family had lived in Champaign. I was given the name Robert after Steve's dad. I so admired my Uncle Bob that by age 10, I wanted to become a doctor as well. Steve was 6 years my junior, although that age difference did not mean that we were not best friends growing up. Steve was the extrovert in the Lehmer clan. He was the supercharger in the family get-togethers. This was evident early on. I recall a family gathering of grandmothers, great aunts, and both Lehmer families in Colby, Wisconsin in 1948. Steve was 2 at that time, and his mother had put him down for an afternoon nap. Everyone else had assembled out in the backyard having a wonderful time. Not to miss a moment, Steve climbed out of the open bedroom window, diapered and all, to join the party. My dad, Jim, had a wonderful hobby of photography. Our family vacations frequently were to places of outdoor beauty. We visited Wisconsin, Mount Rushmore, Yellowstone, and Rocky Mountain National Park. My dad had a photographer's eye and always a camera in hand. The basement in our Champaign home held a small photographic lab full of lights, developing tools, enlargers, and so on. I believe that Steve became intrigued and enamored with photography early in life, and it later became his passion and profession. Steve and I always had this ongoing joke that somehow we became two peas from the other's pod. The doctor's son became a photographer, and the photographer's son a doctor. I will always remember Steve for his true spirit for life, his energy, and thoughtful kindness. My wife, Gloria, and I miss you, my friend, Bob. I have one more. Peter, do you mind if we read yours? Is that okay?
Although our encounters were few, there was significance in every one of them, as when he gave me a private walk of his UCLA studio that, after years of working on campus, I had yet to see, pulling from the flat wooden drawers to display oversized landscape photographs, one after the other. The handmade prints showcased one very particular theme, one that as a photographer myself had to consider every time before pressing the shutter. Among the other elements of a landscape, like foreground, a balanced composition, a tension element, of course the light had to be right, the depth of field, all leading to that ultimate dimension, to the point where the eyes would rest and the spirit will feel rewarded from the visual trajectory on the horizon, the final destination. For the first time, I was made aware of its significance. That line stretching from left to right held the landscape like a bow on a gift wrap. How could I ever have overlooked this? Perhaps the obsession on what was in the package kept me from appreciating what was out there in the distance. This place where we all will settle our eyes and lay our souls. Thank you, Steve, for this, your gift. Until we meet again on that distant point, love wins, always, Peter Askell.
I want to point out that Steve did not do that large painting on the wall. But that wall has mostly work prints on it, things that he's done, trials he did, and just to the right of the black poster board is a picture of leaves, and that's the last print that he made. I thought you might like to know that. He had a photographer's eye for architecture, whether it was the architecture of buildings or trees or gatherings or water. He did a great deal of water pictures to show subtleties of difference. We have so many photographs that we could never get all together. We kind of took some things from home and put them on this wall. The one on the left is pretty much an older print that he did here not too long after we moved to LA for him to go to art school. And the one on the far right is a later one of a similar median view, but I believe that's in Montana, looking west from a little town that's south of Billings. And the sky was really beautiful, but it was beautiful due to smoke from fires in the summertime. The one that's kind of long gray there, that's a picture of Flathead Lake covered in smoke from wildfires. So he also had another one, which I don't know what happened to, but he had done at Big Sur a long time ago on a similar thing, and he just was standing by Big Sur and looking out on the ocean, and the ocean was just fog, and he couldn't distinguish where the water stopped and the fog started, and that was a favorite of his as well. So sometimes he was able to show things that people didn't usually see. We have here a rock. If you need to be grounded as you speak, you can take our rock. If you need to have a microphone to speak, we'd be glad to pass it around. But we'd like to hear some of your stories that you have to tell. Anybody want to start? Annie? Oh, four. All right. You need a mic?
No, I don't.
Okay. Tell us who you are first.
Hi, I'm Thor Erickson, and I was a student here and a long time ago and a friend of Steve's, and I'm from Flathead Lake. Just like to share a few words. The first time I met Steve was 25 years ago, about 25 yards from where I'm standing now, right down there. I was a freshman here at UCLA, and the photo lab was in the basement of the art library. I don't know if it's still there now, but the building that stood in place of this gleaming glass behemoth you see above us was a 9-story brick and concrete tower with an old bronze plaque that read Dixon Art Center. We as students would stay up all night painting in the hallways and playing loud music and drinking beer on the rooftop. And on particularly windy nights, you could actually feel the whole thing moving a few feet side to side under your feet. Needless to say, for a small town kid from northwest Montana, it felt strange and untethered and entirely wonderful. On my first day of photography classes, I met the foundation of that tower, so to speak. There in a windowless cave, seated behind a metal desk, basked in the glow of a warm 60-watt lamp, sat a very down-to-earth looking bearded man in a red woolen shirt, suspenders, a cup of black coffee that I would later discover was never empty, and what looked like a coyote laying at his feet. He looked up from his desk and over his glasses at me and eyed me in a way that was both cautious and cordial, and he had a way of doing that, speaking with his eyes. What struck me instantly was that those eyes had an immense amount of kindness and wisdom behind them. He was taking me in before drawing any conclusions. I noticed he had a photograph of himself hanging on the wall behind him. He was standing in a deep green forest holding a chainsaw with one foot up on the bumper of an old blue truck, beaming with a great toothy smile, wearing the same red plaid shirt he wore before me. "A great example of color balance," he would say. And as I peered closer, to my surprise, there was a personalized Montana license plate on that truck, and it read "Photos" with an F. And I remarked how surprised I was to see such a specific license plate in the middle of LA, of all places, and that was it. We were friends. We were from the same place. Small town kinship has a funny way of bringing people together in big cities, but it works. Steve showed me everything there was to know about photography, exposure, negatives, and printing, and always in a way that was patient, kind, and knowledgeable. I don't think I ever saw him speak without smiling. I came to know the backstory of the infamous photo on the wall, how he and Kathy and Ann had braved several harsh winters in a canvas teepee with a constant fire going to keep the promise of freezing to death at bay while he and his trusty chainsaw built their beautifully designed Montana home, one lodgepole pine at a time. He was independent like that. I never saw him drink alcohol, but you led with that story of him being green. So he told me that when he met his native brother in his 20s, I think, I asked him, why did he never drink? I said, let's go get a beer. And he said, no, my brother had a problem with alcohol, and I told him that I wouldn't drink. And I said, well, did that work? Did he not drink anymore? He said, no, he drank again. I said, well, let's go get a beer. And he said he couldn't. I said, why? And he said, because I made a pact. He told me how, over the years, he became close with the people of the Crow Nation in Montana, and how he was allowed to dance at their gatherings. And one year, somebody was dancing, and he was politely asked to stop, but some white guy they didn't know, and he pointed at Steve and said, well, how come he gets to dance? And they said, well, that's different. I think that's what made him magnetic to people, his good-humored individual spirit. You either shared that with him or you were too impatient to see it. Steve wanted the meat out of things, the foundations. He was a rock-solid person, and he always remained true to himself, something I think everyone who met him instantly recognized. If he wanted to do something, he would figure it out, and if anything was worth doing to Steve, it was worth doing well. That was his way, calm, cool, collected, and always thinking, always admiring. And he called me one day simply to tell me that he admired the work I had done on painting his ceiling at his Beverly Glen home. And he said, you know, I'm just sitting here staring at the ceiling, and I really like how you cut all the paint in. And then he said, you know, Thor, if you just did a little bit of effort that you do at the 11th hour, you could do a lot of great things. And he was right. Effort is rewarded by capability, and I still, to this day, give my 11th hour every hour. He was a mentor to me and many others, but more than that, he was a shining example of a damn near perfect model from the ether in human form. And I think he was a teacher in some past life, so it's fitting that he embodied that role with his time here with us. And I know we'll all see him again. And a smile and a hug, and maybe even a bottomless cup of coffee. Thanks.
Thank you, George. Gilbert?
Hi, everyone. My name is Gil.
Can you hear back there?
Can you hear me? I'm going to read from my notes here.
What's happening?
Steve was a remarkable person who touched the lives.
Can you use this, please?
Oh.
Into the email. Yeah, there you go.
Steve was a remarkable person who touched the lives of everyone he met. I may have not known most of you here, but I can say with certainty that you are all good people, because that's what Steve was and always will be. I first met Steve through our mutual friend Donna, who is here with us today. It was at one of her parties in Los Feliz where we were introduced. My first impression of Steve was that of a kind, gentle soul. He had a soft-spoken nature that was immediately comforting, and his affable personality made it easy to strike up a conversation. I could tell right away that he was someone I liked, and it was only confirmed when I saw him wearing a plaid woolen shirt and jeans, which was my favorite ensemble. Over the years, his plaid shirts may have changed, but Steve remained the same, a kind and gentle soul. Steve's gentle nature always reminded me of a character from a Walt Whitman poem. Whitman believed that all human souls are connected, and that a person's soul is what enables love, spirituality, and ultimately humanity. That's exactly how I saw Steve, a person whose soul radiated love and kindness, making him a truly special human being. Steve and I shared a few similarities. Apart from our love of plaid shirts, we both wear glasses, enjoy taking pictures, and love classical concerts. And of course, we shared a love for In-N-Out burgers. One memory that stands out to me is when we were in Montana for Donna's wedding. We all took a trip to a mutual friend's farm, and while walking around their beautiful property, we stumbled upon some ripe apples and cherries. I asked Steve if I could take a picture of him, expecting him to pose in front of one of the many fruit trees surrounding us. Instead, he surprised me by dropping to the ground and lying horizontally in the grass as if he were posing for a Playgirl centerfold. With his clothes on, of course. I couldn't help but laugh at his unexpected and playful nature. My last memory of Steve was at an overcast spring day in Manhattan Beach with Kathy. I had just come out of a hospital stay, and we hadn't seen each other for quite some time. We had a lovely lunch and then went out for a walk outside overlooking the Pacific Ocean. I took a photo of Steve in a spot where the cement floor was etched with the words, "Beyond this point lies the rest of the world." Looking at that photo now, I'm filled with so many emotions. In that moment, we shared a feeling of friendship, camaraderie, and love that words cannot adequately describe. Steve, you will always hold a special place in my heart. And I will never forget your kind and gentle soul. Rest in peace, my dear friend, until we meet again. I'll see you down the road.
Hi, I'm the one that screamed, I'm from high school. My name is Lynn Hushin-Holly, and I just wanted a couple of words about Steve back in those days and also today. Steve we came from a high school in Ithaca, New York, and I know Malcolm Campbell, who he just wrote that about him. But the roots of our high school are so deep. It sits where Cornell University is, and Ithaca High School, and it's an island, it's 5 hours to New York City. And that group of us in the class of 1964, it's our 60th anniversary or reunion this year. Steve would have been there for sure, yes. And I will represent him there and here. But the class was so tight, and it was just before Vietnam, so we lost a couple of classmates that Steve knew and I knew. And I didn't know Steve that well, but we came from a class where you knew everyone anyway. It was about 400 people. And Steve was the one that everybody knew, even if you didn't go out with him. And I did not meet him again or I never met him. The first time I met him was at our 50th class reunion. And I met Ann and I met Kathy, yes, not Ann yet. And we bonded because we found out we actually lived in LA. And we never knew that. And so it was like, wow. And he was a photographer and teacher and all that. But at the time, I was a curator of galleries and a writer, and I was curating in Santa Barbara. And so I had some of his photographs come up there. But I also found 2 of my other classmates that sent work that were professional artists and photographers. So that was kind of the start of a little bond, and I would go up and have coffee with them. And Steve and I, though, we would talk about things now, but we always ended up back in Ithaca. Because his father, I don't know, but his father was the doctor for the entire district. And there were a number of other doctors, and Steve once had an accident in a swimming pool, and the doctor who saved him was the father of one of our tight classmates as well. So when I say this was a tight class, it still is. And there'll be, at the 50th, there were 200 people that came back. And it's amazing. So I just want to say that I am really happy to have re-met him. And I think it's important that we reconnect with our roots, because the roots are what brought us to this point today. So thank you, and love to you guys. We'll talk another time. Okay, thank you so much.
His energy and total love of life always amazed me. I miss him. And this is Dan Bangs, another classmate.
And
We have somebody else that'd like to share a story? Okay. We have. Do you need a coffee now?
We were neighbors of Steve and Kathy's for 26 years on Retta Lane, and Deb will talk about the early days and not the quick after that.
So when we met Steve, we didn't know anything about him being a photographer, but we did know that he had built a house while living in that teepee with the fire burning, and Annie as an 8-year-old, and we thought, oh, this man has mojo. So we're in this big house on a hillside, and things keep going wrong, and there's a leak, there's this, there's that, and whenever something went wrong, our kid, who was about 3.5 at that time, would go, call Steve! Call Steve! That became like a mantra for us in our family. And you know, Steve was a member of our family, as was Kathy. For all as is Kathy, that's true. For all those years, just one more story, which is every year we threw a crazy birthday party for our son. And Steve and Kathy generally had some role in it. The one I remember most was, I think it was fluorescent bug catching with Indiana Jones.
There's a treasure map.
And a treasure map, right, and clues. And at the very end of searching, these kids found their clues and got to a place. They get to the end, and out comes Steve, wrapped in toilet paper like a little mummy. And he was just a part of our life, and had a childlike wonder that he was never afraid to share with other people, and that we greatly appreciated.
Yeah. So one afternoon, we're heading out for a weekend event. That's the three of us together. And it was just one of those beautiful late spring afternoons in Retta Lane. And Steve said, you all look pretty good. Let me take a photograph. And so I said, okay, sure. You know, he goes upstairs, gets his own equipment, poses us in front of the bush in front of our house. And following what you said, there's a Thor about Steve's eye. He positions himself very carefully. He's like on the ground practically. And the focus, the laser focus of his vision as he was really taking us into the whole thing and making it happen. I felt like I was being chased by an apex predator. I mean, it was like that intense, you know? And, you know, I mean, we know much of his work. We have some of his work. And, you know, it was like seeing him in that mode on the other side of the lens you just suddenly understood so much more about who he was and how he just made that happen. And it's just one of those really big things.
Yeah. And we'll miss him a lot.
Yeah.
My name is Arnoldo Vargas. I worked with Steve here at UCLA as a student way back in the 1900s. I was 21 when I met Steve. Well, actually, when I became friends with him, I met him earlier, but I was kind of running around doing a lot of different things around here. And I think when I finally kind of decided to spend some time in the darkroom, it was right around my senior year. So I was 21 when I met Steve. I was finishing my senior year of undergrad here at UCLA, and I was printing work for my senior show. This particular show was what I call my blue series even. It was a friend of mine had recently come home from prison, and he had tattooed his entire face. I chose blue. I painted this turquoise blue backdrop because I thought it would contrast with the brown hues left on his face and the ink from his tattoos. Thus began that series. The conversations I had with Steve in the darkroom had revolved around these images. First my friend, then my grandmother, my mother, my brother, my family, my community. We always had conversations about every photo. I had never worked in color before. I came from I got into UCLA with these black and white photos that I made in the darkroom. So, if you don't know anything about UCLA, this is a conceptual art school. They don't teach you how to do anything. That's the truth, right? So you gotta kind of figure it out on your own, and you gotta kind of lean on people like Steve. You know, they were the teachers, they were the technical staff, and he was really good at it. He was a pro. He would look at my photographs, and I remember him looking at a photograph of my grandmother and saying, "She's too yellow. You know, you need to put the blood back into her body." You know, and then after that, I just saw a bunch of yellow, and I noticed the things that he would see. But you know, I was just a little youngster, and I didn't understand any of these things. I was never very technical. I was more like blood, guts photography. I was just all about content, and he kind of anchored me down with some of the technical things that I didn't understand. At that time, I was commuting from Wilmington to UCLA. It was my junior, senior year, so I was commuting just so that I could save some money. My mom would see me leave I would leave at like at 10 in the morning and stay out here till 10 o'clock at night, and you know, to avoid all the traffic. And so my mom started packing me food. You know, she would pack me these burritos made with homemade tortillas of, you know, beans, orange rice, and cheese. And then one day over printing, I shared one with Steve. I would leave the burritos in my dash. I would, you know, so that I would park down at the park, and then I would leave them on my dash so they would stay warm. So then I would go down and grab the burritos, and then I remember I gave one to Steve, and then, you know, he would say, oh, you know, he would just kind of like be real grateful at these burritos that were warmed by the sun. We became an unlikely pair. You know, I'm from the hood. I come from the neighborhood. You know, and he's from, as far as I knew, I didn't even know he was from New York. I just knew that he was from the mountains in Montana. And so we kind of became an unlikely pair, and he became the person that I kind of connected with here. But we bonded over the most ancient and sacred of all acts, making art and breaking bread. And at that time, I was also going to ceremony. I was connecting with my indigenous roots, and I come to find out that he had been adopted by a native community, and so we connected that way. And again, it was just very unlikely. You know, it was just it didn't make sense, but it did all at the same time. What a crazy world we live in, where a young man raised in the hood and a white man from Montana could connect over the sacredness of prayer and ceremony. After graduation, I went off and I started to make a life for myself. I met my wife, I started a family, and I became immersed in becoming a parent, becoming a husband, and learning how to be a teacher. You know, my wife and I were both high school teachers in LAUSD, and I was teaching in Chatsworth, and I was, you know, just kind of making a life for myself. I decided I wanted to go back to grad school, so I came back to my old stomping ground, see if anybody would recognize me. And of course Steve did, and so did Patty, and so did a lot of people. And so I was able to connect with him again. And I think that what I appreciate was that he's the one that made a lot of effort. He's the one that kind of would reach out to me. He would call me, he would offer help. He learned that I was teaching. I had gone back to my high school, and now I teach in the darkroom that I made the photos in that got me into here. So he would always call me. I'd be in line at the grocery store, and the phone would ring, and it'd be Steve, and he's like, oh, I have this friend who has this equipment that you might want for your classroom, and I still have a lot of stuff in my class that my students use to make work that came because of Steve. And so he was just a very generous, a very kind person, and also very thoughtful, but he made a lot of effort to connect with people. You know, he made a lot of effort. He's the one that was always kind of, hey, what are you up to? You know, he came to my senior show at Cal Arts. He came to my birthday party at my home. During the pandemic, Kathy shared some beautiful orange marmalade, and I was, you know, doing what everybody else was doing. I was baking sourdough bread against some kid from the hood baking sourdough. Who knows that, right? So we ended up exchanging, breaking bread, and you know, that's when we got to meet, you know, Kathy too, and you know, I'm just really grateful. I want to thank you guys for sharing him with us, sharing him with everybody. He was a very generous person, so I could just imagine all the different places that he would take you guys to, and I just want to say thank you, and I'm very blessed and honored to have met him. My kids wish they were here. My older kids, they remember him fondly, and I just want to say that, you know, I'm grateful and I appreciate it, and just know that the Vargas family sends their love. Thank you.
I want you to know that our orange tree has oranges again this year, so there's hope.
Thank you so much.
you'll notice that Leah has a name tag on. That's because she's one of our adopted kids. Over time, we accumulated a lot of surrogate kids. This is our biological one. But we have surrogate kids.
Yeah, I want to thank you for sharing your mom and your dad with me because they are my American family. And one story that I'll never forget is how I met Steve. I came to UCLA in '93, and I didn't know a soul in this country. And Steve was there at LAX holding a sign with my name misspelled. I always tease him about that. And I saw that sign, and that was a huge welcome. And and then they welcomed me to their homes for, I think it was 2 weeks, until I found a place to live here. And we've been family since then. And Steve, I have another story that I remember when I met you in San Francisco. And it was my first Thanksgiving in America, and I have nowhere to go. And so Steve and Kathy and Wiley, their dog, and I go in the back of the trunk. And I remember Wiley licking my face all the way. She was the sweetest dog. And anyway, it's just, you guys are my family here. And my parents came from Brazil and visited many times, and they met them, and we became an extended family. And he was a wonderful mentor and a friend, and he kept us going in the hardest moments of graduate school, and he was always somebody I could rely on. So I'm so grateful. Thank you.
Just an aside about Via. Steve came home one day and he said, "We have a student coming from Brazil and she doesn't have a place to stay, so I invited her to stay with us." I'm glad it worked out. Oh, here's another one of my surrogate kids.
My name is Casey Meredith, and I have you beat. I showed up at the Lehmer's house when I was a goofy kid, 18 years old, and I stayed for 2 years. Pretty much on the sofa. So this is my adopted kid. This is my nephew, who I live in Oregon now, but this is my nephew Ross, who lives in LA, and he's my prop. He's my Polaroid prop. I did come and stay on the sofa when I was 18 because my sister was in school with Steve at San Francisco Art Institute. And in those days, well, not everybody was so welcome, but the Lehmers were welcome. And they said,
What school was that? San Francisco Art Institute.
Art Institute. Did I love that?
Well, where we were in Mill Valley at that point.
Yes. And when my sister Connie, I grew up in New York State, and she was home for the summer, and she said, "Will you give me a ride back to school in San Francisco?" And I was 18, and I had a minibus, so of course, I'll take you to San Francisco. And I landed at their house and on the sofa, and that's pretty much where I was for a couple of years, and under their help and guidance, and I hope I was helpful too. I liked your story about call Steve about something, and Steve knew about anything to do with building and putting things together. And I bought a handsaw and it had some rust on it, and I called Steve because I thought Steve will know how to how to renew this handsaw, and he did, to the detail. And if you need to know, I've got the details. How to clean it up exactly. So Steve was a resource. Well, when I first met the Lehmers, Anne was 4 years old, I think.
Something like that.
Something like that. And so I've known them all the years. I was an incredibly goofy 18-year-old at that point, and now I'm this goofy 7-year-old. That's true. And the Lehmers have been just rock solid, Steve, Kathy, and Ann, throughout my life, and I appreciate all of them, and we'll miss Steve terribly.
I speak on behalf of the Brotherhood of Lab Supervisors, which is how I knew Steve. And in these rooms all over this whole campus, but in particular in this area, have always been rooms full of, brilliant minds and people coming together and people knowing happiness and struggle and trying to embrace creativity. And we also, as the Brotherhood, Valerie is here, as the Brotherhood of Lab Supervisors, we were in charge of trying to maintain some sort of safety level. So I've had the pleasure from the moment I met Steve, he was in this dark room and he always smelled of chemicals, and he always kind of, back to that word focus I heard, he tended to look at things up and through either his glasses or through a magnifying glass, even one that he had attached to him. And he could come up and see things that it seemed no one else could. And that's why I look in eyes in this room, because everybody who's looked in Steve's eyes through the years knew a certain, I guess when you say the humility he had, but that he had a deep ancestral ability to calm people. So I mention, of course, a moment right around the corner. Early in the mornings, in the first day or the second day of each quarter, we were on the quarter system, we would gather together, and along the table there was a hierarchical system where the chair was at the front and then all the full-time faculty got to be in their area. And then there was the visiting instructors or whatever, and then we stood briefly along the edges of the room. Everybody's introducing themselves so you'll know who you're going to be interacting with. And there was the greatest feeling when I would walk in the hallway and the first person I would meet eyes with and who could give me that calming, here we go again, we're still going on, of course, was the wonderful Steve Lehmer. I have the pleasure also of saying that Steve gave me a picture from when they had been in Norway, and it was a beautiful photo he took. And it's of a dry bridge, just a stone bridge that has held for probably 600 years or something. So I put it up and I look at it every day. I never miss a day since the moment he gave it to me and I took it home 20 years ago. I've had and it's Steve to me, there he is that ability to hold together and provide a stability. And Wiley. I'm remembering when I was first invited that we were going to have this wonderful memorial, I was thinking, why does the first thing when I think of Steve, why do I think of Wiley? But again, with trying to maintain safety in the labs, one of the things that I had to, for many, many years, give instructions to was whether you're using a table saw or welding or whatever, what action you would take if Wiley came in the sculpture lab and started saying hi to people, introducing, and it was that interaction and it was that black nose. Way over at Luval Commons, which is our wonderful cafeteria that they probably still have going, we'd get our custom-made omelets, and I'm sitting there one day wolfing it very quickly and who comes walking in knowing everybody's going table to table and saying hi, but it's Wiley in the middle of the Commons, and all the moments that the elevator would open, and if Steve didn't come out, but on her own would be Wiley saying hi to everybody, and was kind of the diplomat and the one animal that we let go everywhere and saw all the critiques and interacted with people. And so Steve and Wiley, they kind of blend together, and I think that's one of the greatest things. You judge a person's soul a lot by the animals they keep. And in my heart, stability, Wiley's sense of humor, and Steve's just real knowledge and deep ancestral caring for people and for education. Thank you.
I want to make one comment. There is a kind of a guest book back there. If you haven't signed it on the way in, I hope you will sign it before you leave. It's an ordinary notebook that Steve would always keep his notes in. So we're not making it fancy, but rather in keeping with his style. This is Ken.
Yes.
You may have it.
Hello. I'm one of Steve and Kathy's adopted children. And anyone who has hung out with Steve and Kathy knows that you eat very well when you're with them. And when I was first getting to know Steve, I knew Steve and Kathy since I was a really little kid. I grew up in Big Fork, Montana, and my dad built their mind-bending giant deck in 1997, 6, 7, and so I knew them from when I was a little kid, but only here and there. And I really didn't get close to them until I moved to LA in 2011. And would go up to Steve and Kathy's and do laundry and get fed really well and all those things that you get from your parents when your parents are not around and you find some that will take you in. And so I didn't really know, I think I just assumed that the good food kind of came out of Steve and Kathy. And then I went to visit Steve while Kathy was out of town, visiting some friends of yours. And I walk in, and it's, like lunchtime, and there's coffee, And Steve and I are, Steve and I's connection is carpentry. We would always build things or fix things up or paint or, so we were like working, we were like, I was hungry, and we were cutting branches and moving dirt, and I was like, what do you have? He's like, oh, I got lunch. So he opens the fridge, and inside is this concoction that he would make out of tuna, olives, capers, celery, mayonnaise, salt, pepper, and it was like a protein bomb that he decided was as good as food. And I was like, as soon as I saw it, I was like, oh, it's Kathy. Kathy's been making all of this delicious food. And the way that Steve has been allowed to get to this higher level of consciousness is because he has someone feeding him, thank God. So I proceeded to make us lunch. And I was laughing at Thor's story where I've gotten those calls too, where you did the ceiling, I did the exterior. And he would sometimes call and just be like, man, he'd talk about it like I had painted the Sistine Chapel. He was so proud of the work. And it's like, well, it's just green. We just bought green and we put green on it. So, and I would always kind of downplay it, but he was so effusive with his compliments for just being me, which was really special. For those of us who were in the Montana Memorial, I'll repeat just a little bit of what I said there, which was my dad and I didn't ever really get along. He's a very smart person, but not a very feeling person. And I didn't think that I would ever get a dad who was softy. And being able to be around an older guy who wanted to talk about life and beauty and what it meant to be alive and care about people was something that I tried really hard to notice how important that was in the moment, but inevitably it's one of those things that I kind of am only realizing now. And I'll just say that in the last few months, thinking about Steve, whenever I think about Steve, the things that come immediately through are these phrases. So you just have these phrases. Like whenever we were building something and it didn't quite line up, but it was like good enough, you might have to correct me on this, I don't know how he would say this. He said, He said, well, it's good enough for a blind man riding by on a government horse.
Blind man on a galloping horse.
A blind man on a galloping horse. And I was like, huh. And I remember he and I really reveled in one. In the slideshow was a man with a fabulous gray mustache. That's Jim Marshall. Such a quintessential Montana man, the neighbor in Montana. And Jim was a machinist, so very precise. And he helped Steve and me side Kathy's studio. And Steve and I were, you know, normally on any construction site you're handing boards to someone else and they'll say, I got it, or, you know, or they'll just yank it away. And Jim had this incredible phrase that Steve and I were just entranced by because it was so gentle, which is that he would say, we're together. You would hand him a board, and when he had it, he'd say, we're together. And Steve and I were just like in awe of this. And I remember after Jim went home and Steve and I were playing cribbage in the afternoon, we had a long talk about how construction workers could be a lot softer. Anyway, I drove here from Montana in honor of Steve, put a few thousand miles on the road, thinking of him on the way down, I'll think of him on the way back, and I really am happy that all of you are here, and glad we can all share a little time together. So, hasta la boogaloo.
Hi, everyone. My daughter, Yana, couldn't be here. She knew Steve her whole life. And she asked me to read a few things. She said, I remember Steve being very good at making you belly laugh, which, as your daughter, I consider a tricky thing to do. I could tell he was one of your closest friends. I remember Steve always being so supportive of me, and especially my art. He always responded to my Instagram posts with clapping hands and heart eye emojis. I remember Steve being very politically vocal. As a young woman who doesn't often see people of his generation acknowledge the world's injustices, seeing this often inspired and comforted me. Of course, there are many more, but these are the first that came to me. Love you. And then I was thinking, what can I say to top that? You know, and I don't know if I really can, but Kathy asked me about a week ago to write something about Steve's artwork, which I said I would try it, but that it would be difficult to do it justice in such a short time. So I had the good fortune to interview Steve for about 2.5, 3 hours in 2001. He was kind of teaching me how to do oral histories. It ended up being the only oral history I ever did, but it's on SoundCloud if you'd like to hear it. So I went back and listened to that and weaned a few things about Steve's history. But first, to start with my personal history with him, I met him at CalArts in the early 80s, and we took classes together with John DeBola, John Brumfield, and George McGrady, and we were both TAs for John Bach. He had just moved from Montana, and I had just moved from Sonoma County, so we were both kind of fish out of water and really feeling out of place, and so we bonded in that way. We had also taken time off after undergraduate school, and so, you know, we had lived a little and knew why we were there. And Steve especially, more than anyone. Anyway, there were a lot of battles going on at CalArts at the time, and we would often talk about, you know, how much we got out of it, and how worthwhile it was over the years. shortly thereafter, I spent 12 years living in Europe, and when I returned to LA, the first person I really reconnected with was Steve. And that was in 1997, and later that year I started teaching at UCLA. And in that interview, Steve mentioned how he had gone to college at Cornell as an architecture major and later transferred to the University of Nebraska, where I guess he met you. And his first photography mentor there was a man named Michael McLaughlin, who had introduced him to the work of Robert Frank, Danny Lyon, Walker Evans, Gus Sander, and many others. And he was especially impressed with Edward Weston. He would often quote him, saying once he came up with an idea and worked through it, he would move on to something else. And I think that attitude of, not getting stuck and always moving on is something that Steve took very much to heart. Steve and Kathy moved to San Francisco, and they helped support each other to put each other through school, from what I understand. And
I was through school, but I put him through, I worked while he went to art school.
right, okay, so she's the one that did him. Anyway, Steve was working as a large format food and product photographer for a while, and it kind of sharpened his technique. But he was, I think, bored out of his mind, if you know Steve, and somehow he got them to pay for a class with Jerry Burchard at San Francisco Art Institute, and that inspired him to go there. And he worked with people like Linda Connor and John Collier Jr. and got to meet some of his heroes like Robert Frank. And also at that time, he mentioned that there was a lot going on. It was a very amazing place to be. There's performance art, the beginnings of conceptual art, art versus art as artifact versus art as concept debate going on. And all of that really affected him, and I think it affected him for a long time. Steve was really a master in the darkroom, but at the end of the day, it was always about what you walked away with. It's like you go to a movie, you read a book, you see a picture, what do you walk away with from that experience? And I think that it was because of his time in San Francisco at the time that he started to see things differently. And then he spent some time on Alcatraz. Not in prison, but the Native Americans had occupied Alcatraz at that time. And Steve ended up doing some documentary style work there. And he met a lot of people who invited him to come to their reservations, which I guess there was a big road trip which followed, which ultimately led to moving to Montana. I think Steve was doing this sort of work over here, like this black and white kind of documentary style, tri-X sort of really amazing work. And but when he got to Montana and he started learning from his Native American family, he really couldn't take pictures anymore for a while. He had a long break where he had to stop. And he said that the reason that was happening is he just wasn't able to translate what he was learning from the elders into pictures, because what he was seeing just wasn't translating into pictures honestly. And Steve had that for that situation where he would often not quit, but stop. And I think those were...
He called that intake mode.
Intake mode. Oh, that's good. I like that. Anyway, Steve said that during these times, this intake mode, Steve learned the benefit of sitting down and being still so that the environment could reveal itself. And he often used the word percolate, which I suppose means bubble up from the unconscious to consciousness. It's also an ancient way of making coffee. Some of you might remember. Steve loved a good cup of coffee, and we shared a lot of those over many stories and wandered in very many places. And eventually, by some miracle, he always got back to the point. I think I see a lot of smiles. You all know what I'm talking about. He used to say that most people teach what's already known, and as a society, we don't give much room to discover and learn on our own. And he very much believed in learning by experience, by letting things happen around you rather than try to control every situation. He rebelled against using his art practice as a way of justifying a preconceived idea. And at UCLA, he learned a reverence for the studio by learning from making and reflecting on the work and dancing with the work and, as he put it, prolonging the foreplay. Steve understood that we live in a society that thrives on distraction, and that slowing down, sitting down, and shutting up were a way of learning how to listen and to see deeply. He once spoke about how frightening that thought of going off by himself and dialing directly to the Great Spirit was. He acknowledged that it was likewise scary to do unknown artwork and risk failing as opposed to repeating oneself endlessly. I think one of the things he gave to all of us was advice to explore and discover. Not just what we're told, not just to do what we're told. Steve believed that as a society we have marginalized otherness, and so with art making we don't have a lot of tolerance for things we don't immediately recognize. And yeah, Steve really helped me dig deeper in these ways. Steve talked a lot about quieting the mind, as he put it, so as to resonate with a sense of place. That's the attitude he brought to his landscape photography, which he became very passionate about later in his career. He wanted to share that experience without, well, he was humble, but he wanted to share the experience, but to do so without preaching. He had enough respect for his audience to draw their own conclusions without cramming it down their throats. He would often say that. And I think that's something I learned from him as well. He did put down the camera a lot, but I'm grateful, and I know we all are, that he picked it up again. And Steve didn't really believe in making self-indulgent art, but he wasn't into impersonal art either. So we're most fortunate that he crafted these images out of wherever he came up with these things. By the way, that picture of in Big Sur is hanging in my dining room. He apparently was taking a picture of the fog in Big Sur. You know where you pull off on one of these by PCH and you pull off, and he's actually just saw these great colors, so he set his camera up looking directly into the fog, and apparently some guy walked up to him and just said, "What are you taking a picture of?" I'll never forget that one. Anyway, I had an experience here where I was teaching downstairs, and Jim Welling asked me told me basically, didn't ask me, he said, "You're teaching color next semester for an intro class." Okay, that didn't happen back then. And so I was thinking to myself, that's a really bad idea. But what I told Jim was, I said, "I don't know how to print color." And Jim said, well, you have 2 weeks. So I was terrified, and Steve laughed and said not to worry about it, and that I'd catch on in no time, and he would teach me, and he was right, it was easy, and Jim was right too, that the students were more productive that semester. So, yeah, some of the series that he did that most people have never seen are a series of like making hay in Montana. And he always used to use this really saturated aqua film. Montana landscapes, of course, and the median views, and the Norwegian doors, and the Vanishing Point series. The last cohesive series that Steve did were of these typologies of kind of water refractions in a lake or a creek in Montana, and it was sort of like exemplifying that old idea you can't step in the same river twice. But it's still, for Steve, you know, it was something completely different from anything he'd done before. And he was always, he wasn't interested in just illustrating an idea, but in really revealing an intimate experience that was deeply seen. And I have one of these above my desk, and it really does invite reverie and take you into wonderful places. Steve had a lot of challenges in the last few years of his life, health challenges. We used to go out shooting together. He's one of the only people I really ever could go out shooting with. And he, you know, eventually he started just using his phone, which he talked about as a sketchbook. So we got to get our hands on that phone. More than anything, I'm grateful for his friendship, and I thank him deeply for making me feel that I have been seen and heard when not many other people have taken the trouble to look and listen. And so I made a kite with this picture on it, that I hope to send up into the sky someday. It's back there. It's my memorial kite series. And anyways, thank you so much for putting up with my long-winded contribution. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Alicia, and I am another, met Steve here at UCLA. He's my teacher, and met a little more than 20 years ago, and I was trying to think about how we first met and remembering it was Wiley too. It was Wiley would always be running around, and then Steve would just go out in the outside and whistle, and Wiley would just come running, and like the trust that they had and respect that he had for Wiley, and I just thought Wiley was such an amazing dog. I'm not into that many dogs on that deep of a level, but like when I met Wiley, I just really loved her. And then I wanted to do an independent study project, and the professor I got assigned to, who was available, we met, but Steve also offered to like be an unofficial mentor with me for the project, and we would meet weekly, and he was really my mentor for that project, and I learned so much, and he encouraged me to, I remember, make a lot of small prints, like just said whatever you see that kind of interests you on the proof sheet, just make some 3x5 prints, and don't worry about them being the best prints, just make them so you can see it better. And I did that, and it was really freeing, and like helped me have a different relationship with the work, and we would have so many great conversations. He knew so much about art and film and filmmakers, and as everybody knows that, but it was really inspiring and helpful, and he was so generous and kind, and spoke of his family so lovingly, and his daughter, and I didn't grow up with a dad, and becoming friends with Steve and having that relationship, like really, he was such an amazing example of a human and a father, and really, it was so healing to me to have that friendship with him, and his generosity and kindness, and just, it really like filled, it really filled any like void that I felt I had in that regard. I felt so much healing from that friendship, and went on to become friends with Kathy and Anne, and your whole family's generosity to me and so many people. There's just so many adopted members of the family, and so welcoming and warm. It was so amazing, and
Well, I should have given you
I know I'm gonna be forgetting things, but I remember driving up to he offered that me and a friend could go stay in your place in Montana on a road trip, and writing down intricate directions, how to get there, and what food to stop out along the way, and what roads to take, and then how to turn the water back on, and like everything. And it was so amazing that he entrusted me and my girlfriend to go be there, and it was so amazing to be there in the house that we all built. And I remember earlier on that trip, I was driving up to Idaho first, and another like intricate conversation about which small roads to take to get up there, and me and my little cousin were driving up, and we ended up on, I think it was Highway 6 in Nevada maybe, and it was just this 2-lane road. It was so beautiful, and there was maybe 2 or 3 other cars for like many hours that we were on that road that we passed, and I was so thankful that I got to experience that. And I'm gonna see if there was something that I knew I wanted to say that I'm forgetting. I'm sure there's many things that I wish I had said that. Yeah, there's so many things that I could say, and that I know I'll continue to remember forever. And one more recent thing I remember him saying just a few years ago, we were at your house, and he was telling this story about hitchhiking, I think, and somebody picking him up, and maybe even giving him a place to stay overnight, and then the next day, or at the end when they were parting ways, saying, how could I ever repay you? And the person said, repay me. You don't have to repay me, just pass it on.
But big part of his persona.
Yeah.
His passing.
Yeah. I love you, Steve. Yeah. Thank you.
Anybody else?
I'd like to say something as well.
David.
I met, do you want to take, I met Steve through Alicia, and he's one of the very first people I met in Los Angeles because I was coming to visit Los Angeles for the first time before I moved here, and Alicia picked me up at the airport, and she was like, well, while you're here, you got to meet Steve. He's this amazing person. He was my professor at UCLA, and he's just the greatest guy. And so we met up here, not far from here. I think it was during the time when the art department was temporarily somewhere else. We went and saw, he gave us a tour of the whole place. We went out to go find some food, of course. And I just immediately felt like this is just such a warm and caring person. And it turns out we both spent our adolescence in upstate New York, so we kind of have that connection. He would talk about Ithaca a few times. He went through my town, Portland. And the things that just always touched me about Steve was his generosity. That we talked about that, a lot of people talked about that, but it's just, he and Kathy opened up their home to us, and we stayed in their home for 9 months while we were starting to renovate the place we live now, where we're raising our family. And it's just so generous and so kind. And not only that, but they were up in Montana working hard, building, I think it was your studio at that point. And not only were they giving us a place to stay, they were giving us constant advice about everything in the world you could ever think of. The depth of knowledge that Steve and Kathy have it's unbelievable. And we plumbing advice, carpentry advice, tiling advice, and just such an amazing resource of a human being, that he has such depth of knowledge and so many things, not just the beautiful and creativity and art that we see around, but the day-to-day things of living. If you're ever driving anywhere in the United States, you can count on Steve to tell you where to get a good cup of coffee and the most beautiful route to go, and where to get a delicious baked good. And I love that passion that Steve had about the good things in life. You know, he really celebrated, and this goes from one of Kathy's baked goods to, you know, a little bit of yogurt with a little bit of upstate New York maple syrup on it. Just like to those kinds of things, but then also just to like his deep appreciation of people and places. And you could tell whenever he told a story about somebody that he really knew them deeply in a way that most people don't get to know people. And because he knew so many stories like that and so many people in that way, you just felt that he sees me and he sees all of us, and he's just such an amazing spirit, and I'm really just
Thank you.
I was a student of Steve's, but much later in life. Steve found me at a time, or I found Steve at a time, and we found each other at a time when things weren't going so great. I had gone to New York and I saw an exhibit of Helen Levitt photographs, and I said, I need a hobby, I'm going to take up photography. And I went to UCLA Extension, and I happened to take this class from a guy named Steve. And again, as everybody has talked about here, we became friends. And I think he knew that I needed a diversion and I needed something to occupy my brain. And one day he calls me up and he says, I have a friend selling darkroom equipment and you're going to buy it. And I'm going to help you set it up. And set up in my bathroom an enlarger and a table in the bathtub that I could lay trays out and make photographs. And we became friends and very grateful for that. And listening to everybody talk today about how he touched so many people, he did. And so I spend a lot of time in Africa, and I want to leave you with an African proverb, which they say when people die, which is, do not be sad that he is no more, but be grateful that he was. And I would leave it with that. Thank you.
Hi everyone, I'm grateful for Steve. I met him through Kathy while I was in high school, and when I needed, parents, they kind of adopted me through a period of time. And I am so grateful because on my senior year, I didn't have funds to buy my senior pictures, and he was so kind and generous that he took me to Cal Arts in Valencia, and he took my senior pictures, and I still have them. My daughter is now a Trojan, she knows all about it. But I'm so grateful, and there's so many stories, but I know everyone wants to share. There also one time we were traveling, my husband and I, to El Salvador, and our car broke down, and they came to our rescue to take us to the airport. And as always, they were there for me when I needed them most. I was only 17 when I met them, but they were the great, a great blessing in my life. I'm so grateful for them to God, but they were great instruments to, bring me to where we are now. And thank you.
I'm Joyce Uehara, and I have kind of a unique friendship with Kathy and Steve, because in the 1980s, I inherited the Veretta cabin, the one that's up there in the Glen. And so I needed to find some people, and I found the perfect people who are like survivalists. I found out they're building in Montana, and so most of my conversations were on the phone and with Steve. So I miss his voice because we would talk a lot, and most of the time he would be saying, I'll take care of it, I'll look into it, and he could do something about whatever is happening up at the cabin. And so I felt kind of like he was a father to me because he overlooked it. My husband wasn't that kind of a person. So, and Kathy, once a month, she would send me a blog of the month, and like a travel log, as you well know, they're all over and hear about the Indian stories and all of just everything. So I felt like I was a real part of their lives, and they were part of my life. And what I hear from everyone, I could feel it. When I think about the conversations we had and with Kathy, I could feel the warmth and the outreach that they did so much of, and it's good to see everybody here. We had a 1-year lease, and then we've been month to month for the rest of the 29. And I have to say, Joyce, I've written you more letters than anybody else in my life.
Oftentimes, it was handwritten. That's the only letter I wrote.
Thank you for keeping us on. Well, if there's anybody else, we'd be glad to hear from you. Or somebody coming.
I was planning on speaking, but I've heard everyone's speaking, so I thought maybe give a couple updates or anecdotes to some of the stories. Coffee, obviously we all know.
Okay. Tell us who you are first.
Oh, I'm sorry. Hi, I'm Dong Hoon. I went to school here when Steve was here, and I met Wiley, and It taught me pretty much every technical aspect of photography that I know, because multiple folks have pointed out the type of program we have. While lovely, not so technical, so learned everything from Steve. And I just happen to be also a very technical person, so anytime there was a computer broken, a printer broken, it was Steve and I staying late and trying to see if we can fix it on a budget, which was $0. And so that's who I am. And we all know his love for coffee. And during those late night sessions, he would explain to me cowboy coffee, which with my love of camping and coffee, he thought I would be interested to know and maybe try. I never told him this out of pride. I did try it. Part of the process is that we use Folgers coffee grinds you buy at the grocery store, but also you put in eggshells, and when they float to the top, it's done. And mine never floated to the top, so I ended up making Folgers soup, which was hidden from all my friends who were sleeping at the time in the morning because I was trying to impress them with early morning cowboy coffee. Never happened. Didn't tell Steve out of pride, but I'm telling you guys. Apple, iPhone, he used to work for the company, I still do, so anytime something regarding a computer or iPhone would come up, he would text me. I don't know if you guys know, but his emoji and Memoji game is really strong. So if you haven't received his custom emoji ever, I'll just show it to you real quick. That's his Memoji that he made of himself. Very good. He used to send me thumbs up, and I did receive a lot of his sketches on his new iPhone love that he was doing. He kept calling them sketches, but I feel like he was only sending me the best ones. But he would always annotate them iPhone 13 Pro Max, just in case I was confused on how he took the photos. And yeah, and that's the last few exchanges I had with him is iPhone photos, his Memojis, and his squirrel emoji, which he was very fond of sending. So anyway, that's what I was thinking of today as folks were talking, and I'll miss him. So,
I know you helped him out many times.
Oh yeah, I probably over FaceTime, I guess. Yeah.
Thank you.
But these stories are so rich and wonderful that I'm really moved by them. And I met Stephen at Cal Arts, and in theory I was his photo teacher. In fact, he was my photo teacher. He knew far more about the mechanics of photography than I did. And that began a marvelous, very long relationship. And so there are two stories. One is that I eventually moved into a loft in downtown LA. And, I had to move because of the circumstances of my housing. I had to leave my house. And so I moved in and I wasn't really aware of the fact that I was the first one to move into this loft, so there were things missing, like there was no kitchen. There was no kitchen, there was no closets. It was just this bare thing that was this loft. So Steve and Kathy, who know how to do so many things, came over and built closets for me and just took care of so many things. And I remember I had cats at the time, and I wanted to be able to open the door so the cats could get out, but I wanted to figure out how to keep it locked so that people couldn't get in. And Stephen solved it. He had a gun, and I don't know why, but he shot the floor. And so what that did is it meant I could put a screwdriver into the floor and behind the door so my cats could get in and out, but nobody else could get in. And he solved it. And so that was one story. The other story is, I'm hearing so many relational stories about Kathy and Steve and all the bridges they made with people. So there was a time when I was going to be flying up to Montana to visit them. And so I had the plane reservation, I was ready to go. And then my friends in Toronto told me that their son, who I was very good friends with their son, it was David Esquivel and his son, and his son had a brain tumor. He was young, but his son and I were very close as well. And so I had to go to Toronto to be with Ben in the hospital. So I had to cancel my reservation and go to Toronto. So Stephen is telling his next door neighbor, and I don't know how far away Stephen's next door neighbor is, but it's a way down the road. It's not like next door. And so Stephen's telling this guy about the fact that I went to Toronto to see Ben, and the guy says, "Oh, David's my brother." David was his brother of this neighbor who was right next door, sort of, to Stephen Lee. And it was like, I mean, who could imagine that this coincidence would happen? But it could only happen with somebody like Steve. They are very remarkable about making connections, and this was one of the most remarkable ones. But Stephen was a remarkable human being, and so was Kathy. And as people have said, they both are masters at so many things and have given so much to everybody. Oh, is that right?
Yeah. So, any other brave souls? Well, we all miss him and his smile and his sayings. I have to point out that he would say one of the most important tools in photography is the push pin. So we tried to be true to that and use push pins. And yeah, I don't know. There's not going to be any more new pictures. And the funny thing is he gave away a lot of prints, but he almost never signed them. So signed prints are a rarity.
So sign yours.
Yeah, when you give away a piece of art, make sure your name is on it. Thank you all for coming. It's been a very uplifting, heartfelt experience for me. And just thanks. And try and take his spirit away with you and share it with other people. Thank you.